This is AmericasDemocratsorg, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Democratic Party Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz has a lot to say about Obamacare and the Tea Party's extremism, and she advises members of both parties in Congress just try to be normal human beings. A Veterans Week reflection by law professor Mary Dudziak on how America has come to be in a permanent state of war. And Bill Press interviews Joe Cirincione, president of the Ploughshares Fund, about the NSA and also Syria. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, chair of the Democratic Party and a congresswoman from Florida, says if you don't like the way your kitchen was remodeled, don't burn down the whole house. Take the counter out and redo the kitchen cabinet knobs. Her point? The Affordable Care Act needs minor revisions, not arson. And joining us now on AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is a member of Congress from South Florida, 23rd District representation, and serves as chair of the Democratic National Committee. She has written a book laying out the long view of where America ought to be. It is titled, For the Next Generation, A Wake-Up Call to Solving Our Nation's Problems. Congressman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Why did you choose this time to write this book, a prescriptive model for both the Democratic Party and the nation? And what are some of the issues we ought to be concentrating on?
Well, I realize as a mom and a lawmaker who has 3 young children, my twins are 14 and my youngest is 10, I make every decision, personal and professional, like most every parent I know, through the lens of being their mom. And, when the Tea Party was, successful in 2010 at sweeping through a lot of victories and then started hurdling us from crisis to manufactured crisis, I really felt like it was time for me to sound the alarm bell that real people, regular people, instead of throwing up their hands in frustration, that hopefully through writing a book and laying out the problems as I see them and what the solutions are on issues that have really kind of stalled because of the Tea Party extremism and the my way or the highway politics, that hopefully through reading For the Next Generation, regular folks can, who are not inside the Beltway insiders, can get a sense of what the issues are and have a roadmap for how they can make a difference on those issues.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've been a strong supporter of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, as everyone likes to call it now, given the problems associated with its implementation. Do you think any changes ought to be made? And did anything you or the president say when the law was passed turn out to be wrong?
Well, like any significant change, whether it was Medicare or Social Security or Medicaid or the prescription drug Part D plan that rolled out under George W. Bush's administration, you're always going to have some bumps. You're going to have some kinks that need to be ironed out, and some of those kinks actually will have to mean that we make revisions to the statutes. But we've been doing that for more than 200 years through American history. The analogy that I have used is if you didn't like your kitchen redesign, you wouldn't burn your house down. And that's what the Tea Party Republicans in Congress have consistently been saying that they need to do. Well, first of all, they wanted to take the house down from day one and have pushed hard to either delay or repeal the Affordable Care Act, despite the fact that it was passed by both houses of Congress, it was signed by the president, it was upheld by the Supreme Court. We had a presidential election that was the central question, and we won. And
right.
and now in the 2013 elections, just last night, we saw another affirmation of the voters' desire for us to just move forward and stop the my way or the highway politics. So I think what we need to do is address the problems as we implement the Affordable Care Act and make sure everyone has access to quality, affordable health care. And let's try, and that's what I talk about in the healthcare chapter of the book is, look, we're going to be able to move forward and work things out on the Affordable Care Act and implementation if Republicans embrace the idea that everybody should have access to quality, affordable health care as a right and that it's not a privilege. If we can at least establish that premise, then, we have a lot of room to make adjustments and deal with some of the challenges that arise. But if we can't at least agree on that basic premise, if we're still arguing over whether or not quality, affordable health care is something that every American deserves, then we're going to be arguing for a long time to come. And look, I think thus far, given that the Republicans were willing to shut the government down and bring us to the brink of economic disaster, all in the name of trying to derail quality, affordable health care for Americans, that's not going to help them politically. In fact, it's going to be harmful, as we saw in this year's election, and I think we'll see it on into 2014.
I really like your analogy of you don't like the kitchen, you don't burn the whole house down. And I would love to hear the administration kind of start to simplify that, okay, yeah, hey, we need to make some changes. And perhaps if you could call the president for me and take care of that, that would be great. That would.
Well, I talk to them pretty often, and
right.
But that's what the president believes. I mean, look, if you didn't like your kitchen, you would take out the countertops, or
right.
you would change the knobs on the cabinet doors, but you wouldn't burn down your house.
Yeah.
And the president has used, I thought, a very good analogy with the iOS 7 and other applications, software applications. When there are bugs, the software companies don't scrap the whole thing after it's been released. They come out with version 2, and they fix the bugs. And that's what needs to happen with the Affordable Care Act.
We're speaking with Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz from representing the 23rd Congressional District in the state of Florida. Do you agree with the criticism that political people were put in charge of the rollout instead of the experts?
Okay, I mean, making sweeping generalizations like that is just that. I mean, it's an oversimplification. This is a significant shift in the way we make sure that health care is delivered. We're shifting from a sick care system to a wellness and prevention system. We're making sure, for example, that the seniors in my district in South Florida, who, God love them, they spend a lot of time, ruminating over their aches and pains, but now they have a wellness visit that they can go and get every year without a copay or a deductible, so that when illness strikes, they're more likely to catch it early. And we're that much more likely, because of early detection, that we're not paying for very expensive late-stage health care when you catch things early and you're increasing their chances for survival. And so we have to make sure that the implementation continues, but also that we work on the problems and iron them out as they arise. But essentially, this is a system that has been in place and been up and running since 2010 when the law passed. We have the prescription drug Part D program, where the donut hole, which was a medicinal prescription drug coverage gap, that's closing and made more prescription drugs more affordable for seniors. Young adults have been able to stay on their parents' insurance until they're 26 now, and you've got children who had pre-existing conditions who couldn't be dropped or denied coverage since 2010. 35% tax credit for small businesses has been in effect since 2010, who provide coverage for their employees when they have less than 25. So the Affordable Care Act has actually been in place, and that's one of the reasons that the more people have become aware of their benefits and have been utilizing them and accessing them, the more popular the Affordable Care Act has become. And then it got even more popular when the Republicans shut the government down, trying to take those benefits away from people.
Right, absolutely. I want to move on to some elections, if we can. What will it take for Democrats to retake the House next November?
Well, we have a really good opportunity. We did before the shutdown and the near default, because we have to we've got about 17 seats that we need to pick up. We have I think it's 19 seats that are held by a Republican that President Obama won, and about that many where Romney just barely won. The DCCC led by Steve Israel has done a fantastic job at recruiting candidates. Because we're a big tent and a party that has room for a broad spectrum of the philosophy, and unlike our Republicans who have a litmus test and are in the midst of a civil war with over the Tea Party extremism, we've had an opportunity to be able to field and elect candidates that all unite behind the Democratic label and understand that we need to all fight for job creation, fighting for America's middle-class families, make sure that everybody gets a fair shot and a fair shake, and that we have a tax policy that makes sure that everyone pays their fair share. And Republicans have, and the reason we have an opportunity to win next year is because Republicans have doubled down on the extremism. I mean, if you look at the election results in Virginia, 1 in 5 voters said that women's health was the primary driver behind their choice for governor. And that's a pretty stunning percentage of voters that were alienated by the Tea Party the focus on getting involved in a woman's reproductive health care decisions. And I think that was reflective in the Todd Akin defeat, in the Richard Murdoch defeat, and doesn't bode well for the Tea Party governors that are all having to run on their Tea Party agenda that they tried to implement, which isn't what their constituents thought they were signing up for on into 2014.
And at the end of his campaign, the Republican Ken Cuccinelli in Virginia, as you mentioned, the state of Virginia governor's race, he all of a sudden started beating the drum. We've got to defeat Obamacare. It's like, well, what about the state of Virginia?
Yeah.
Have you forgotten where you are and what you're doing? I mean, it was just, it was mind-boggling.
I think shutdown politics it was very clear that the shutdown politics really affected the outcome of the election in Virginia. I mean, Terry McAuliffe ran a fantastic campaign. What's really exciting, Jim, is that following President Obama's campaign, the pundits have said, well, a lot of people got involved in Democratic politics and in the Obama campaign because they liked President Obama. And the big question mark is, are Democrats going to really be able to replicate that ground game and the grassroots, door-to-door, neighbor-to-neighbor, neighborhood team leader focused approach? And I crisscrossed the state of Virginia during this campaign, especially in the last few days leading up to Election Day, and you can see that our model is working. We're replicating it. Voters, our activists get it, and they understand that through our digital and technology advantage, plus the need for us to get out and use our most precious resource, which is our time, for our candidates so we can advance an agenda that matters to working middle-class families, that's what we've got to roll up our sleeves and do. And it was really exciting to see it replicated and really bodes well for our elections for next year.
We're speaking with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Congresswoman representing Florida's 23rd Congressional District, and she's written a book, For the Next Generation, a wake-up call to solving our nation's problems. Here's a problem that we have, and I'm wondering what we can do to improve on it. The civility of floor debate and committee hearings.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to start there, right?
It really does, and that's something. I have a whole chapter on civility, and it's called Discourse, Not Discord. And look, even as the chair of the DNC, obviously I support my party's agenda wholeheartedly, but I recognize that things aren't going to always go my way, and in order for us to actually move the ball down the field and work together on achieving goals that will ensure that America can be competitive in this global economy, we've got to set aside some of our you can't ever compromise your principles, but you might have to compromise your preference. That's advice I got right when I was first elected to the state legislature years ago, and I talk about it in For the Next Generation. Got really good advice from an elected official who said, Debbie, there's 2 kinds of votes you're going to take as a legislator: a vote that comes down on your principle and a vote that comes down on your preference. And you should never compromise your principles. But you may have to vote against your preference sometimes in order to achieve a more significant goal. But when it comes to civility in particular, I've been in the minority. Of the 21 years I've been in office, for 13 of the 21 years, Jim, and so I've always had to figure out how to be effective in a Republican environment. And the way I've found it's best to do that is to make sure that I build relationships across the aisle, that you be a normal human being. What the Tea Partiers have done to civil discourse is not only have they just made it uncivil, but they've treated the opposition like the enemy. And when they disagree, you're not just wrong, you're a liar. And so they've really descended our civil discourse really into depths that I've never seen before, and it makes it very hard for us to reach across the aisle and find common ground.
I will assume that you would not necessarily like to see more Republicans of any kind elected to office, but are
That's
women...
That's a safe assumption.
Right. I was really going out on a limb there, you know. But are women the key to more bipartisanship?
Yes, I mean, I think there's no question, and I started. This is another story that I tell in that same chapter. After I shared my own experience with breast cancer, I started with Joanne Emerson, who was a former Republican member of Congress, the Congressional Women's Softball Team, and there's been a tradition of the men, mostly men, playing a baseball game for about 50 years, and the Republicans play against the Democrats. What Joanne and I did, along with Kirsten Gillibrand, is we started a bipartisan team where the Democratic women and Republican women play together against the common enemy, the press corps, the female press corps, and we raise money for breast cancer, for a young women's breast cancer charity. But being out there practicing every day at 7 in the morning, we've found for 3 straight months, we've found that we get to know each other as women, and we don't talk politics when we're out on the field. We talk about our kids and our husbands and partners and the normal problems that women as girlfriends talk about. And so when you get to know somebody as a normal person, then it's a lot easier to have that conversation the next time a difference of opinion comes up. And in fact, I debated during the shutdown a number of my women colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and people were kind of amazed that the debate wasn't vitriolic and it didn't descend into accusations and finger pointing, and that there was so much agreement between us, particularly on the notion that if we just locked the women in the room, what Republicans and Democrats together, we could probably solve a lot of things in a matter of hours. Because women often, I've found, are looking to find a way to get to yes, and aren't so interested in bludgeoning their opponents, and want to give the person they're negotiating with a piece of a victory. So I think for that reason we would achieve civility if we elected more women and put them in positions of authority. So
you're saying you all are normal people?
We are normal people, absolutely.
Right. Okay.
I mean, listen, I'm balancing work and family every day. Like I said, I have 3 young kids. I've got to figure out how we're going to get them to soccer practice and make sure that they do their homework. And I've got to that all comes first, and then everything else has to be built around it. And that's why, with this book, I hope that I can motivate people who are also trying to just make it all work, figure out how they can find the issue that is the most important to them, and then we give them a roadmap for how to make a difference on that issue. No,
that's wonderful. Now, before we let you go, you originally were a supporter of Hillary Clinton for president, and maybe as party chair, you can't really endorse anyone, but aren't there?
I cannot.
Right, okay. Well, and I'm not going to ask you to. However, I am going to try and slip in a little question that might give us some headway. Aren't there other Democratic women who would be viable presidential candidates?
Oh, of course there are. And, we not just viable presidential candidates, but candidates for governor. And, I just started the Democratic Women's Alliance at the DNC, which is our institutional outreach program, a permanent program for women's outreach. And, it's an opportunity for us to make sure we build the Democratic bench and recruit women so that anytime there's an opening, because so often women don't self-select and don't think of themselves as being the best person for the job, we're going to make sure that there is our training programs and recruitment efforts at making sure that up and down the ballot, when an opening comes up in a community, that we've got a good bench of women that are natural fits to run for those spots. And I think that's going to do public service and governing a world of good.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz, member of Congress from the 23rd District in Florida, serving as chair of the Democratic National Committee, so therefore she won't tell us anything we really want to know. But she also has written a book titled For the Next Generation, A Wake-Up Call to Solving Our Nation's Problems, and hopefully we start doing that real soon. Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We look forward to doing it again soon. This is AmericasDemocratsorg, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to AmericasDemocratsorg and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is AmericasDemocratsorg, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. The folk song says, "I ain't gonna study war no more," but author and law professor Mary Dudziak has written a comprehensive study of all the wars America has fought, is fighting, and may continue to fight. And we'll speak with her in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
On the day before Halloween, ethically challenged members of our lobbyist-haunted House of Representatives did a perverse imitation of profiles in courage, turning that body into profiles in spinelessness. In particular, they cravenly caved in to an outrageous and dangerous demand by Wall Street whiners. Such financial powerhouses as Citigroup just hate having their profiteering recklessness restrained by the regulatory reforms passed after their 2008 financial meltdown. Even though shock waves from that Wall Street collapse continue to devastate America's middle class, the banking elite have completely recovered, including recovering their swaggering arrogance and ability to sway money-hungry Congress critters with rich campaign donations. Thus, a majority of the House happily did Wall Street's bidding, passing a major bill that undercuts the reforms so banks can return to the risky casino games that wrecked our economy. Of course, the members insist that the banker money did not influence them. For example, Representative Jim Himes, the second largest recipient among Democrats of Wall Street cash, asserted after the vote that money, quote, hardly determines, thank goodness, how legislators think about these issues. Really? Then why did they let Citigroup lobbyists write the bulk of the bill? And why did they let Wall Street lobbyists orchestrate the debate by handing out talking points and questions for members to parrot during the consideration of what became known as Citigroup's bill? Even a Republican staffer warned against simply mouthing the industry's lines. "I know that some of our members are inclined to whore," he wrote, "but we cannot be apes." This is Jim Hightower saying, yet, for this Halloween trick and treat show, the majority of House members did indeed pose as apes and parrots for Wall Street.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. If you just look at all the campaign ribbons and medals handed out by the U.S. military, you can see that this nation has been in pretty much a permanent state of war for a long time. Author Mary Dudziak says Americans are not called upon for any real sacrifice to support wars, such as public engagement about foreign policy. And joining us now on AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Mary Dudziak is a law professor at Emory University. She's the author of a book called Wartime, which investigates the relationship between war and time itself and between war and civil liberties. And I mentioned she was at Emory University. She is the director of the Project on War and Security in Law, Culture, and Society. Professor Dudziak, thank you very much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me.
Now, your book is called Wartime, as I mentioned, and it is almost a philosophical discussion of time itself based on artificial distinctions between war and peace. How does war change time?
Well, let me talk about how we think war changes time. So the way we imagine American history is that there are 2 kinds of time, wartime and peacetime, and history consists of moving from one kind of time to another, from wartime to peacetime to wartime. And one of the things that comes out of that is that because peacetime always follows wartime, wartime is by definition temporary. So when we enter what we think of as a wartime, we're entering a time that is by definition going to come to an end. So we think of war as being bound in time, and because of that, the wartime itself is often used as an argument. Why are we torturing people, perhaps, in the early, quote-unquote, war on terror? Because it's wartime. That's sometimes an answer to an extreme policy, because it's wartime. And when someone uses wartime as an argument, they basically have two things in mind. One is this era, what's happening this wartime, is really important and the nation's survival is at stake. And the second point that's being made by that is it's temporary. Don't worry about it so much, because what's happening now is going to come to an end.
The book counts any number of American military interventions, small wars, forgotten wars, based on the military's own standards for awarding medals. How many wars or interventions have there been, and what's the longest period of, quote-unquote, peacetime in American history?
Well, there are a lot of ways of counting American wartimes, and what I did for the book is I thought, well, let me use a U.S. government database, and the most solid one I could find was U.S. military campaign service medals, because these are medals that Congress enacts them. They're given to soldiers, and the medals that I track in a timeline in the book are medals related to serving in hostile contexts. So basically, it's really hard to figure out what peacetime there is. The best I was ever able to figure it out, it was about 6 years in the 20th century, but that didn't count covert action. So if you build in covert action, it's basically hard to find anything. In the timeline I have in the book, there are 59 different precise kinds of different precise conflicts for which soldiers would get medals. When you go through the actual database of medals, you think you've found a little bit of peace in, say, 1924, but then there's another medal for conflict in another region. So what tends to happen throughout the 20th century is just as troops are being withdrawn from, say, Nicaragua or China, then they're being deployed somewhere else in the world, and there's another, medal for that. So what we have is ongoing deployments in these smaller wars. The big wars that tend to trigger the attention of the American people, and then especially post 1945, the importance of covert action, which then doesn't even get registered because it was secret. Of
course. How can he can't?
Right.
Right. That would make sense.
Soldiers get mad about this. Actually, I mean, there's a lot of there are some memorials or efforts to remember people in, for example, the Strategic Air Command, and others involved in covert action. There's also an effort by veterans to create a Cold War medal, and that basically conceptualizes the Cold War as a precise military conflict that started after World War II and then ended about 1991. So, veterans have lobbied for Congress to establish this as a kind of, as essentially a long American wartime. So I think it's interesting to use this database as a measure because, soldiers who have been deployed in these conflicts have wanted to have their service recognized.
We have to put everything into little compartments, it seems, in life. I mean, we have rush hour, we have lunch hour, we have the dinner hour. Everything has to be in these little things. And the reality is, when it comes to wartime, it's pretty constant now, isn't it? I mean, this is just what it is, it seems.
Well, it certainly has been. I have undergraduates this semester who, in talking about their own experience, they don't have a memory of living in an era that wasn't a wartime. So certainly for this is the post 9/11 generation. Their complete experience of their own lives is the U.S. Being involved militarily in the Middle East. So, but the longer history, when Congress created medals in the first place, it went back which happened in the early 1900s. Congress established medals for the Civil War going forward. And you know what a lot of the first medals were for? They were for wars against American Indian nations within the continental U.S. So there were these small wars within what's now the continental United States before we started engaging in the small wars around the world in China, in Latin America, in various parts of Asia. So it's been ongoing for a very long time.
We're speaking with Mary Dudziak, law professor at Emory University, author of the book called Wartime, which investigates the relationship between war and time itself and between war and civil liberties. You mentioned 9/11, and you have a chapter titled, What is a War on Terror? Is terrorism something a nation can actually wage war upon? And if not, what's an appropriate national response to non-state aggression?
Well, in the immediate post 9/11 moment, there was actually a discussion about what the nature of the response should be, and this is all now sort of water under the bridge, and people don't talk about it anymore. But right after 9/11, many people did come together around the idea that this was a war and required a military response. But others argued, wait a minute, we've had terrorism for a long time, and we've been dealing with it. And the way that you work on this is, this is a terrorist act, and you use essentially international crime control tactics. War isn't the only way that a nation can deal with dangerous people who want to harm Americans. Although there was widespread support for the United States through the beginning of the action in Afghanistan, it was the Iraq War that really divided both Americans and the U.S. and what had been this moment of global solidarity. So, the world came together. People around the world were carrying American flags and going to U.S. embassies around the world with flowers and crying, right after 9/11. And so the world came together in support of the United States, and that all fractured in the run-up to the war in Iraq. One way that a nation can work on a problem of terrorism is by working together with a broad global coalition and finding the bad guys and bringing them to justice. So the fact that you have people who want to harm you, doesn't mean that you launch military strikes on another country and go to war. And just briefly, the central problem with the idea of a war on terror is that it has no boundaries in space or time. And so it's essentially, by definition, a war without end. President Bush got us started on that conceptualization, and President Obama has initially, he walked that back, said we're in two wars, in two places, Iraq and Afghanistan. But then he started reframing that as a war on Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, and then all of a sudden it starts looking like the idea of a war on terror that is popping up all over the world in different places, a recipe for permanent war.
Wow, very sobering thought. But I guess this seems, anyway, to be our new normal, and that wartime is just a constant for us.
Well, I have to say it's a constant for us unless Americans decide that they want to be politically engaged and they want to be heard, and they want changes in American military responses. That the American people don't always ask a lot of their representatives, but if you think back to the Vietnam era, in the late 60s and the early 70s, the American people made their voices heard. Mm-hmm. There was a draft during Vietnam, and as the war expanded and continued, Americans got out in the streets and said, enough. It's time to bring this war to an end. And we don't see that anymore. And my own view is that we don't have really deep engagement on the part of the American people because we're not affected by this, right? The military, the work of the military is being done by those families who serve, both the individuals who are in the services and their families who sacrifice for the rest of us. It's felt by their communities where American bases are located. And then the more we use military contractors, which has basically grown exponentially post-Vietnam, but especially post sort of Clinton-era privatization, we now use contractors for so much of the basic support work that you can have a broader U.S. military footprint with less use of troops. And then add technology onto that, and the fact that we can use the power of war without human beings themselves being at risk when we use drones and other kinds of robotics. And this is the future of American war, right? More war power with fewer American human beings being at risk. So this basically enables the inattention of the American public. So I do think that people can have their voices heard, but because we don't have, skin in the game in some ways, we don't have the same exposure to the costs and consequences of war as happened when there was a draft. We're just not seeing the same kind of robust war politics.
Stand up and speak up, people. That's the message here.
Mary, I agree.
Right? Yes. There's the bottom line. Let's see 1969, 1970 all over again. Well, parts of it anyway. Mary Dudziak, law professor at Emory University, is the author of the book called Wartime, which investigates the relationship between war and time itself and between war and civil liberties. Professor, thank you so much for your time with us today on AmericasDemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back sometime soon.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for covering this important issue.
You are quite welcome. And this is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Joe Cirincione, president of the Ploughshares Fund.
I want you to know that with Joe, you and I have talked about drones a lot, and I've got a lot of concerns about drones and the escalating use of drones under this administration. However, I've admitted, and now as drones start to creep here into the United States, that there are some uses of drones that I could accept, like for monitoring forest fires, right? Mm-hmm. That's okay. Mm-hmm. For the Coast Guard to use them for air and sea rescues and that kind of stuff. I think that's a good use of drones. It turns out there's another very valuable use of drones that now having been adopted in several southern states, and that is to go after the feral pigs, which are raising hell in farms down in Louisiana because they're these big monsters. They come in, they breed with the regular pigs, they tear down the fences, they ruin the crops, and so the farmers are using drones. Here's a farmer from Louisiana telling how it works.
This is the thermal camera on the airplane that, for all intents and purposes, it makes the pigs look like they're glowing in the dark.
Makes them look like they're glowing in the dark, and then once the drone, zeroes in, lights them up, basically, then the drone...
Oh, no!
There you go. Think about that. These little drones out there.
Oh, God.
Going after feral pigs.
Doesn't seem fair. A pig shoot.
Anybody else hungry for bacon?
I was going to say,
love some bacon right
feral
now.
Bacon price. It sounds pretty good to me.
But this is a pretty...
Bacon that can't be tamed.
But it's a pretty creative, innovative, way to use a drone.
Yeah. Well, I think this is, we're going to be seeing more of this. I was just watching, I was watching Nova the other day, and they had some guy, some scientist at MIT or something is designing a system of very small drones that are going to fly into crash sites and such, like where buildings collapse and fly around in there. Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of drones seem to be here to stay for the time being.
So the question I have, Joe, is the same people that are out at the CIA who are running the drones in Pakistan, are they the ones running the drones for the feral pigs?
Yeah, there are two guys that work out there named Bubba and Dub who are
Well, it's on their spare
looking
time.
for pigs in the South.
Right,
Oh, God.
It's a side job.
It's a Discovery reality show. It's just going to happen. I just realized that.
Started right here.
Pig drone.
Swine hunters.
Pig drone.
Hog drones.
I'm not sure we wanted both these guys in the studio at the same time. I'm not sure we could handle this. All right, 12 minutes after the hour. We're going to be joined a little bit later by a reporter from the Toronto Globe and Mail about, speaking of feral pigs, about Rob Ford, the mayor of Toronto. Hey, we got so much going on here, Peter. You don't mind if we don't do a
No, don't worry about it. I'll step aside.
All right, we'll step aside.
I had great stories for you, but nothing's gonna top hog drones.
No, I think we've done, but Joe, I'm really glad you're in today because we haven't talked since, and Evan, you and I have been at the White House at the briefings with all this talk about NSA.
Yes,
and it first came out with Angela Merkel, and so Jay Carney's response for whether or not we were tapping our cell phone is, the president told her when she made that angry phone call, we are not tapping your phone today, and we will not tap it in the future. He would not answer the obvious question.
Yes.
Well, I mean, the answer was so obvious that's clear. I mean, you couldn't have any more of a admission than that, I think.
Yeah, that we did it in the past. Yeah. Is this creating a problem with our allies?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I was at a private session with some former heads of intelligence agencies. The whole thing was off the record, although I guess not for the NSA. But
not for this show.
Not for this show. But I had the feeling that these intelligence officials still are denying reality, still haven't quite grasped how bad this whole series of exposures are. And as you know, the New York Times and the Guardian have said they've released only about a third of the information that Snowden has given them. So we're going to see these stories continue to come out, and embarrassing stories like this, like we're tapping world leaders. And, to a certain extent, everybody knows this, but not this extent, not her personal cell phone, this kind of tracking. Or the story from the New York Times the other day, no morsel too small for the NSA. The extent of this kind of data collection, it's really starting to hurt the agency. I think a lot of people sort of brushed it off or decide, who cares? I didn't do anything wrong. If they're tracking my email tracks, what difference does it make? But increasingly, you get the feeling of an intelligence apparatus that's gotten too big and is now out of control.
Do you believe the president didn't know about it?
He might not have known the details. He might have been known that we're monitoring German officials' communications, and we've done this for many years, and they monitor ours. But he might not have known the details of how far this has gotten.
What do you think of this Casablanca Defense that we are hearing now from the NSA, right? This, there's gambling in this establishment. I mean, do you think that's totally tone deaf, or is that indicative? I mean,
I do think it's tone deaf. I mean, part of it is true. Everybody does do it. The British spy on us. But it's not to this extent, not with this scope. There's nobody in the world that matches the kind of intelligence capability that the United States has built in just the last 10 years. That's what's so new about this. We can see everything. We can go everywhere. And that's what's starting to freak people out.
Well, I'll tell you what freaks me out is if the president did not know about it, if we were, and if, he was at the Brandenburg Gate standing alongside of Merkel in June.
Yeah.
All right, but so if we're tapping her phone and Benjamin Netanyahu's phone, who knows who else's phone, and the president doesn't know about it, then who is making the decision?
Yeah.
That's a pretty weighty decision, right? That we're going to tap the private cell phone of one of our best allies. And if anybody in this government has the power to make that decision without telling the president of the United States, things are really out of control, it seems to me. Huh?
Well, again, it's a scope thing. There is so much intelligence collection going on that you really wouldn't expect the president to be checking off on all these things. But you're saying, well, how about that box that says world leaders? Can I check off that box?
Yeah. Shouldn't there be, I guess my question is, shouldn't there be some restraints or some parameters on the collection of intelligence?
Well, I saw Hayden was on CNN or something talking about this, and the former CIA director, Michael Hayden.
No, he was on the Amtrak train.
That's right, also on the Amtrak train. But what he was saying was something that, like, and I'm not sure about this, that the intelligence comes in, and some of it was so good that maybe people should have been questioning where it came from, but maybe they weren't. I don't know. I mean, my question is, where is the line in terms of how common or uncommon is this? I mean, should we... So the Germans, if they were able to tap Obama's phone, they wouldn't because of decorum, or sort of... like, my question is, where like where are those lines? I think that's the big question for everybody. It does seem surprising, this Merkel phone thing, but I wonder how uncommon it is to see this sort of stuff happening.
Well, so this is the true part. It's not uncommon. You remember years ago, the U.S. was nearing construction of a new embassy in Moscow, decades ago, and they had to tear it down because they found bugs were built into the walls of the embassy, including into the seal of the United States that was in the ambassador's office. So, we can't move in. Tear the whole thing down, start all over again. So obviously, this kind of thing continues, and our allies do. And the British, as I say, the British, the French, the Israelis, spy on us.
You mentioned his name earlier.
Yes.
Isn't it time to recognize that Edward Snowden performed a public service in revealing this information? I believe, and look, nothing that's been revealed so far that's come out of his documents has been proven to be false. Everything is true.
Or you could say has really harmed U.S. national security.
Has he?
As far as we know, no. As far none of the stories, none of the exposed an agent or jeopardized anyone's lives. It's just letting people know the extent, and I think this is healthy. And so when I was in this meeting with these former intelligence chiefs, I was saying, you've got to be more transparent. I know this is a hard word for you, but you got to let people know. I think in America there would be support for a lot of what they're doing if we knew about it. And what's undermining the entire intelligence effort at this point is these exposés of the extent, the scope of all this that we just didn't know about. And it raises this question that you raised, Bill. Who's authorizing this? Who's saying this is okay? Does the president know this? Does the Congress know this? Do the voters know this?
Yeah, what's fascinating is the administration has fallen all over itself to express how eager it is to have a conversation about this. Eager it is to have a conversation about all these things that we're doing. But that conversation wasn't going to happen unless this Snowden thing happened.
It would not have happened.
That seems
without,
very clear.
Yeah.
Two things. It would not have happened without Snowden, number one. Number two, what I've been trying to get Jay Carney to respond to recently is he keeps saying, well, we're having this conversation now. We're having this review at the White House level.
Yeah.
But we don't know anything about it. Who's in charge of this review, right? What are they really looking at? Where are their meetings, and why can't we know something about their meetings? How long do they have for this review? When are we going to see the report? It's a top secret review.
They've made some changes due to the review, they say, right? They've already made some changes, but we don't know what those changes are.
We don't know what those. Remember with the gun safety? President Obama said, we're going to have this commission, this task force. Joe Biden's in charge.
Yeah.
They're going to have public hearings, and report will be back in a month, right?
Yeah.
But this thing is all under wraps. It's all under, it's typical of
One last word about Snowden. There's been a lot of criticism of his going to Russia, and why doesn't he come back to the United States and face the music like Daniel Ellsberg
Yeah, I know
did?
why.
But you have to say he's played this pretty well. I mean, he understood how much information he'd given these newspaper outlets, and he's letting it all come out. So he's staying, at least for the next few months, safely away from prison and letting the information come out, and then maybe he'll come back and handle all this in a judicial way.
With all due humility, I must say it doesn't get any better than this. Joe Cirincione, Evan McMorris Santoro, and Bill Press. Part of it. You got all three of us here. We'll continue. Don't forget. And you're welcome. We'll find a place for you here at the table. 866-55-PRESS. Joe Cirincione recently had dinner with the president of Iran. Didn't have to tap his phone. We'll find out about it when we come back. Here we go, 25 minutes after the hour, Thursday morning, November 7. In studio with us, President of the Ploughshares Fund, Joe Cirincione, and Evan McMorris Santoro from BuzzFeed, covers the White House for BuzzFeed, here as a friend of Bill. Joe has a new book out, Nuclear Nightmares. Next time you're in, we'll have to talk about it.
Yes,
bring
a copy in.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much,
by the way. Let's continue on the big stories of the day.
I mean,
Evan?
let's talk about this Iran dinner. Are we seeing? Is this a turning point? I mean, have we turned the turning point now in terms of changing our relations with the Iranians?
Yes, we have, and it's not just the phone call between Obama and Rouhani. It's not just the meeting between Secretary of State Kerry and Foreign Minister Zarif, both of which are historic, haven't happened since the revolution 35 years ago. But it's the interlocking negotiations that are going on now. Iranians meeting with Americans, meeting with the other nations that are represented in these talks. Today in Geneva, they're trying to hammer out what they call the initial step, where Iran will agree to suspend some of its activities, roll back some of its activities, and in exchange, the West, led by the United States, will agree to suspend some of the sanctions, start to roll back some of the sanctions. They're looking to forge that initial step. If you can do this, if there's an announcement tomorrow or maybe in the next couple of weeks, then you'll actually talk about starting to resolve this Iranian crisis that has gripped us for 10 years, that has had people talking about war, Israel striking or the U.S. striking. And it will not only end the Iranian crisis, it could be the beginning of a major realignment between the U.S. and Iran that we haven't seen in 35 years.
From the outside, what are we seeing in Iran? Is this a change in the people? I know they voted for this moderate candidate, or is it a change in sort of like the religious top leadership of the country? What should we take away from what the Iranians are thinking now?
It's a recognition that their economy is collapsing in large part because of the sanctions, but also because of economic mismanagement. And the election in June was a sweeping mandate from the Iranian people for change. They elected the most moderate of the candidates that were offered, and there's really a consensus among the Iranian elite, including the clerics, that they've got to fix the economy. The only way to do that is to end the sanctions. The only way to do that is to make a deal on the nuclear program. And I think you're seeing that consensus now operate in the kind of negotiations, the kind of offers the Iranians are making.
We have less than a minute, Joe, which is unfair.
Go.
But I got to ask you, Syria, the chemical weapons, is it on course? Is it happening? Is Syria cooperating?
Another remarkable turn of events. So weapons that Syria denied even having 2 months ago, then they are now declared their facilities. They have destroyed their production capability. Syria can no longer make chemical weapons. The UN just verified 22 of the 23 declared sites. So this is a deal that is working, and we should see it completed within 6 to 9 months.
And they're destroying their weapons as well, right?
The weapons destruction has started.
Yeah. Huge step forward. Joe Cirincione, great to see you, my friend.
Thank you, Bill.
It's ploughshares.org, Plough, shares.org.
This is the Bill Press Show.
That's all for AmericasDemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Mary Dudziak, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For AmericasDemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the show and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today.